Name's Will. Hi. Usually when I'm asked to give an introduction, I usually say I make the sun come up in the morning and I make it set at night. Otherwise, I'm just a regular kind of guy. But anyway, I'm from Maine, and I'm largely a subsistence farmer there. I'm the director of a thing called the Scatter Seed Project, maintaining genetic diversity. But what we're talking about today will have very little to do with that. So we're going to be talking about a lot about things having to do with maximum use of space in particular, and simply a more eco-efficient, a more practical use of land. It'll help me a lot to know a little bit more about you. For example, some of you, I think, are mainly interested in like sort of backyard garden, subsistence garden for your own use, which is how many of you are in that category? That's me pretty much, growing food for your own use. How many of you are focuses on market gardening? Okay, relatively few, 4 or 5 of you, and your focus is more on CSAs, direct sales off your farm, selling to restaurants, that kind of stuff. Which? All of the above. Okay. Okay, this works very well for me because the stuff that I have experience with, the stuff I can be talking about today, will be mostly useful for people growing their own stuff. However, I'm going to do everything in my power to make it transferable to those of you who want to use this for market gardening. Now, let me just check where's my notebook gone? Here it is. This just glasses keeps me a little bit organized here. I digress like crazy, and this helps me not do it quite so badly. Some good than ever. So when the people that are paying for this whole thing, it's not Say or Grant, but whoever the thing is, one of their criteria was that I was given was that was talking about minor crops, and I wasn't sure whether that might be a little bit problematic, but and I assumed that their focus probably was more on market crops. No one said that, but I was guessing that, and that's not my strength at all. But we'll connect with that. They had sent a list very nicely. Sent a list of what's eligible to be considered under minor crops. And it's pretty much everything that anyone has in their garden and produce. It basically excluded things like soybeans and cotton and sugar beets and grain. So fine. Even though I may be talking about that somewhat because I grow all of those things, the things that I'm mainly talking about are totally what they approve of. That's nice. But then when I tried to think about what should I talk about, 2 or 3 or whatever, what special crops to focus on, that got a little dicier for me, and it occurred to me, with the help of one of my workers suggested, I'm going to sort of be talking about all of them, but in the context of a system or systems of growing things which allows you to make much better use of your space, of crowding things on the land. There's a combination of things that do that. And so, just get our first. Would someone mind pushing the, if it's not already, I think we're too light right now, the third thing down, and that right by the door? Yeah. The third one down was the one that seemed to be ideal. I think everyone will still be able to take notes, but does that work for people that take notes? You can see? Okay. And yeah, it sharpens up the pictures a lot, as we'll see. Okay. So, okay, this one is particularly dark, but that's the way it is. So I just started off with this one because it kind of typifies a few of the examples that I'm talking about. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about is making more use of the third dimension of your garden. Trellising or whatever, having things grow upward, getting much more use. An example of this paste tomato here, Royal Chico, is a determinate type, sprawling type, okay? You don't have to make anything, maybe little stakes, but it yields fairly nicely for the space, but nowhere near what this one here does. Actually, this one here is an old English cherry tomato called Gardener's Delight. I've grown it for years. And I put it on a 6-foot trellis, a lot of poles going this way, and it yields bodaciously. It yields marvelously, that much more than the Royal Chico or any dwarf. Takes somewhat longer system. Takes the work, this is important, takes the work of building the trestle, yeah, and taking it apart every year, storing the poles. But given all that, and that's why this might not be as suitable for someone who is, you know, if you're growing acres of tomatoes for your market, then it's not so useful. But for small-scale intensive gardening, this works really, really well. The main problem with that particular tomato is exquisite tasting. Of all the tomatoes I can think of with best flavor, Gardener's Delight is right up there. Very juicy, very sweet, redolent of tomato-ness. It's just really, really excellent. The main problem that it has is that it cracks at the drop of a hat, splits like crazy. Okay. Well, I accidentally bred, I don't usually breed new varieties. My main job is to keep from breeding varieties, is to preserve varieties and keep them as is, the seed of rare or endangered varieties. But I came across this one here, is a cross between Royal Chico and this one. And I named it Gardener's Sweetheart, because you can't see it very well, but these are all kind of heart-shaped. They're a lot like that, but they're heart-shaped. They're a little drier, tougher skinned. They don't crack at all. It, again, needs a tall trellis to grow on. Fedco is offering that one this coming year. It's going to be on the market, and I think a couple of other small companies are offering it. I've been stabilizing it for a couple of years to make sure it's true to type. But this one will give me a whole lot more yield than that one. I grow them both for different reasons. But if I were a very limited backyard space, I would focus on that three-dimensional thing. So anyway, the onions, as I'll deal with a little bit later, have some different issues. Bulb onions don't lend themselves to companioning with other. Obviously, you can't grow them three-dimensionally, and there are certain things that go along with them, issues, problems that involve them, which scallions are a remedy for, or a partial remedy for. We'll talk about those. And companion planting, which I'll also be talking about. Those giant kohlrabis in the background there, they were companioned with sugar beets and scallions and Dutch white clover for green manure. So again, we'll be talking about these. I kind of use the slide just as a sort of typical of three different formats, three different strategies for growing food, which give you a good bit more yield than one otherwise might get. So to start right in, let's learn how to play with this. We tend to think of our gardens, you know, like in the wintertime you make a map of your garden, a plot, you know, on a piece of paper, and you figure out where the rows are going to be. The reason we do that is because we tend to think of our gardens as being two-dimensional, and of course they are not. There is length and there is width, but there is also depth and height. Some crops will go down a lot deep, use the space further down than others will, particularly deeply dug, rock-free, you know, double-dug soil like intensive gardens are. But also there's the sky. Things that can go upward will give you more yield, and like the example I gave was that the Gardener's Sweetheart cherry tomato. Here's a case here of John Paula setting up a trellis for growing pole beans, a particular variety that I grow for pole beans. For green, this is for green pole beans, not for dry beans, by the way. And just for your interest, the variety that one should grow. If you're growing anything else, you're just wasting your time. If you're growing pole beans, you want to grow the variety Jimenez. J-E-M-I-N-E-Z. Okay, it's a pole originally from Mexico, but it does fantastic in Maine. Fairly early for pole beans, later than bush beans, but not too much. Yields bodaciously, and it's wicked gorgeous, as we say up in Maine. It's green with these carmine. I think we'll see some later, some streaks on it. It looks really wicked cunning. And as you cook it, that all fades away. You get a beautiful green bean. The thing about Jimenez is it yields so much, that's almost a problem. You get far more than you can use. Far more. Well, that would be a problem, except that they can get kind of gone by, long and a little, you know, old, and still not be too fibrous and still be really elegant tasting. Even then, you can't begin to keep up with them. You can have a lot of them go by. Well, going by means that they still make an excellent shell bean. You know, shell them out like green limas? Yes. Oh, fantastic. Very productive. No way can you keep up with them, even at that stage. They are so yielding that an awful lot of them are going to get by to the dry stage. Well, that's great for seed, but you only need so much seed. But fortunately, they are also a marvelous dry bean. They're a little like a very fat pinto bean, so a soup or chili bean or whatever. Great bean. So there's no such thing as having too many Jimenez beans. Yeah.
Well, will you be talking about pounds per square foot as you're talking about?
Ooh, you want numbers, don't you?
Ooh. Got it?
Ooh. In some cases, yeah, in some cases I can do that. In this particular case, I can't.
Yeah.
The best I can do, I have worked on getting the numbers to compare them with bush beans. And we're talking about, you know, usually 3 or 4 times the yield of a comparable bush bean here.
Okay.
So yes, there's the labor of setting it up, and it's easier on my injured old back to pick these things than it is the bush beans. But they're bigger, lustier, robust, heavy potted. They're better quality than most bush beans. But the yield is vastly better. Is that a number? Vastly better? It's like several times over. And yeah, I wish I could help you a lot more with that. I'm terrible with numbers.
Will Fedco carry them also?
Fedco has been up and on and off with carrying them. CR and I have this ongoing, I ridicule him in public whenever I can, so here I'm going to ridicule CR. The years that they have offered them, he's complained to me that they don't have a really reliable source of them, but it doesn't matter much that they don't get that much demand for it. Well, in their catalog, he particularly says about Jimenez that it's a bodacious yielder, or whatever his words are, but some people find it has overly beany taste for some people. They taste too beany for some people. Yeah. Nowhere in the tomato section did they say that it's redolent and all these. They never say this is too much tomato. If you really like tomato, you don't like tomato flavor. They say don't grow tomatoes. But for some reason, this bean has this really fatal problem: is it tastes too beany. And he's right. It's a robust bean, green bean flavor, dry bean flavor. It is very. If you don't like beans, then don't grow this. In fact, grow beans. And so, yeah, I always tease them about this. Some years they have it, some years they don't. Most years I have it to offer. I don't think I do. I'm not sure if I do this year or not. I usually have it to offer in, like you want a packet, not pounds for people to, yeah.
You're able to save the seeds then.
Well, if you get started. Now, for me up in Maine, you're in a banana belt down here. Up where I am, some of these pole beans are a little bit late. So if I were to grow them, like I say, if Fedco wanted me to grow a crop for them, I wouldn't dare to because I'll get plenty of dry beans, but I'll have an awful lot that won't. So it's perfect for me, growing them mostly to eat and having a lot go by for seed, much more than I need for seed. So fine that way. But if I were growing them for seed, that'd be a little bit more of a problem. It might not be down here, but it's not a variety I would recommend necessarily growing for the purpose of being a dry bean. Its great virtue is for a string bean and secondly for a shell bean. But it's totally useful, elegant for any of those uses. And gives a huge use in this amount of space. Now, as I'll be explaining later, most of my pole beans, I don't plant on a trellis like this. I don't waste the time of going out and cutting poles. I have them on a trellis which grows itself. Okay, but in this case, like say, for example, amaranth and sunflowers. I'll plant it as a companion crop of those. We'll get to that later. But green beans, that's if they're dry beans, that works fine. There's a little problem with growing green beans that way, at least I've found. You want to go in there every day or two and pick some, and it's a little harder to find them in among the leaves of the sunflowers and the amaranth and so forth. So I grow those all by themselves. That's the crop I'm after. I'm not trying to get them as a catch crop along with something else. So I grow them on both. But my other beans that I'm growing for dry beans, that's another issue. We'll talk about that soon. So here's John Paul is setting up the poles there. We set up this, putting the poles and tying across the thing about 6 feet or so, 7 feet high, and then lean all these poles up. They're 4 feet apart between them. By the way, something I doesn't show here. Years when I'm really on top of my game, which is rarely, but once in a while, I would, early in the spring, I don't wait until Memorial Day when I'm putting my green beans in. Long before that, as soon as the snows go, I will put some furrows in here. The trick is you need at least to get this thing up first so it's not in your way. Get it up very early, even if you don't put the outer poles on. In there, I might put in early turnips or turnip greens or any number of early crops, radishes, scallions, a whole lot of things, spinach you could put in there. That will be about the time you're putting this, they'll just be maturing. And by the time these are up 2-3 feet, so they're even thinking about giving a shade issue, that crop will be gone. It works quite well, but it requires forethought. This is a good place for me to make this. I may be saying this several times. There is, in the book, which if you don't have it, haven't read it, you must. It's actually, you can get it through Gutenberg Project online. You got to buy it. Farmers of 40 Centuries, by a guy named F.H. King, who was something like, he kind of the equivalent of the head of the USDA or something back around the early 1900s. He made this extended tour of China, Japan, and Korea about 1910, and was blown away by all the things he saw, how their intensive system of doing things. And he reports in great detail, particularly agriculture, because that was his thing, but all kinds of things, industry, and how clever these people are at getting a lot out of a small space because they have a lot of population. Definitely resource limited. So what they do to get around the challenges of resources, yeah.
You remember the section he wrote on night soil? People would invite people to use their
roadside
bathrooms, so they would build
privys.
very ornate privys. and get more people to.
They usually have a privy next to the road, and you can do what you can to make it, you don't just put in some Sears robot catalogs and reading matter, but you make it very nice. You make a point to make it look attractive.
Right.
So that I'll stop and take a dump there when I'm walking by.
What's the name of the book?
The book is called Farmers of 40 Centuries.
And the author?
F.H. King. And again, you can get it from whatever, Amazon and things like that, reprints, but you can also get it for free. You can read it online through at the Gutenberg Press. If you've never checked out Gutenberg Project, you've got to. I read so many books, I can't afford to own much of a library, but it's almost everything's there, yeah.
I was going to say, what got me interested in this workshop was seeing my Asian neighbors when I used to live in Boston, planting their backyards. And they had all these things rigged up. They got, they were feeding their families out of 20 feet by 30 feet.
Right.
Asians are masters of that. Italians are pretty damn good too. A lot of urban areas.
Neighbors that were Italian.
Well, I've seen Backyard Garden in Toronto and other cities, the Italian neighborhoods, and they'll have grapevines growing up to the side of the house, and then a fig here, and then tomatoes growing in the shade of that, and whatever. They'll do some very intensive things. So that's a lot of what I'm talking about today is inspired by the kind of things that these people do. But Asians have got it down. They've had to. They've had centuries of overpopulation and to produce enough food. They've had to come up with great
soil.
And right, and so that brings me to the point that this guy, King, one of the quotes that I always remember from him, in the course of describing all of these ways that they, companion things and get greater yields and use the whole year, or sometime when something is just ripening and something else is just being planted and so on. He says, and this is very, very important, and I'll probably say it more than once. He says, of course, all of this crowding of crop plants on the land must be accompanied by a crowding of gray matter in the skull. And of course, what he's saying is this intensive stuff takes more labor, more eyeballs per acre is the expression some people have used, paying attention to things, working out the details. I remember a late neighbor that was stopped by to visit me once. He had a garden and he put things in like everything was with a rototiller and a tractor and everything was 3 feet apart, even if it was onions or something. And he was looking, and I was there taking my measuring, like whoops, this is too many inches this way. I'd move the string over that way that I'm using for measuring thing for keeping a straight line. He was blown away by that. When you plant with a ruler, I don't know, we couldn't imagine that. Well, I was getting as much or more space from my quarter acre, let's say, as he was getting from 2 or 3 acres. And in his case, he had the 2 or 3 acres, didn't matter, so it didn't, whatever. It wasn't organic. He was just buying stuff, putting it in, selling it off. But my situation is different. And anything that I can do to get a little bit more of food or something valuable from a square foot of ground is something I take very, very seriously. And just by the way, this is what my dad used to say, I wondered, why do you do this? You have plenty of, I've got acres out there. I've got more space I could use. But it's not just a case of how much land you've got. Growing a crop takes lots of resources. Labor, fertilizer, water, and so forth, the time. And so if you get the same amount of food from a smaller space, for example, the land that Dad was talking about that I could have been plowed up more ground in, that was growing grass. Well, even though I'm a vegan, I'm not keeping livestock, I'm not making hay of that, that grass is important to my system because it's composting it, mulching with it, it's part of the fertility, it's part of, I call my gardens without borders. It's I'm looking at the bigger picture than just what's on the piece itself. And so to have more garden space, just because I have more room for my machinery, means I'm going to be producing less grass, proportionally, and that's a loss. I need total crops, greater amount of total crops. Not only the crops that feed me, but the crops that feed my crops, which is my hay field. So for various reasons, it very, very much behooves me to crowd stuff as much as I can and get bigger yields. So anyway, back to this thought. Okay, so like I say, that itself will give you triple the amount of production, or quadruple or whatever, the amount of production of beans per piece of ground. But how much the better if you can put other crops in among it. By the way, this would all get mulched later in the season. But if I also had some early turnips or something come off here, that much better. Okay.
What do you mulch it with?
In this case, usually hay, trashy old crappy hay, mainly because there's 4 feet between here. I can easily, I can put it in between the poles. But mostly I mulch with shredded leaves. And that's a whole other big subject, and some of you have expressed a lot of interest in it, radial chips and leaves. Hopefully we'll have lots of time before this is over to go into those in great depth. So I'd like to talk about them. Very, very important. Again, if you're thinking in terms of a garden without borders, you're not just looking at the inputs of seed and fertility and stuff in this piece of ground. You're looking at where it came from. Where did that sulfo-mag and that rock phosphate, where did it come from? What was the carbon footprint of that stuff? How much, we think in terms of the dollars we put into it and the dollars we get out if we market the crop. And we may think in terms of the practicality of our hours, labor we put in, but there is so much more. And how much, let's call it earth blessing, whatever resource, naturally, it goes into making this item, this food or whatever. And looking at the big picture, that's what I'm all about, and that's why we're focusing on this today. Okay, here's that same trellis. Some weeks later, the beans are up like that. I wish I had a photo. I do somewhere. I couldn't find it. Have with it pretty much all the way up. This thing will be covered way up to the ridge and up to the top. And a lot of times they'll be hanging down, and this thing will be so heavy laden with beans. And if I would just go by what everyone can reach, I would go a little higher than this. If I were my wife or others can reach, I wouldn't go beyond that cross rail.
Do you put one plant for each diagonal?
No, every one of these has a hill of beans, has 4 to 6 beans. They're usually 4 or 5 beans that are each one, thanks to that point. Because there are 2 feet between them. And so if I were planting regular beans, spacing is usually 4 inches. Pulled beans usually figure 6 inches per plant. So therefore I'm figuring at least 4. Usually I put 2 on each side of the pole, but there'll be a furrow here when I'm planting them. So I'll put 2 beans here, 2 beans there, and then cover them up. Does that do?
So two for each support?
No.
Or for each of the...
Two on each side of the pole.
Oh, okay.
4 for the pole, yeah, sorry, thank you for clarifying that. And anyway, I let them go to the clouds and back because I'm not concerned if I can't reach them. I'll get whatever I can reach, but those that I can't reach, come the first frost, most of them are going to be shell beans. Or I'll simply pull the thing, strip the thing, and get the beans then, if they're at that stage. If they're gone by and they're either shell beans or dry beans, fine. I don't have to be able to reach those top ones. If I had to be green beans and only green beans, then there'd be no sense in adding that on. I want maximum total food, whatever form it is. Okay? Now, so this is one of the ways of doing, starting with the most basic, and then we get more complicated, believe it or not. This is just simply providing a trellis. But then it occurs to me, I says to myself, says I, well, these poles, I've got acres, so there's no problem getting all the fir poles I want, but there's the labor of cutting them and storing them every year and all that kind of stuff. What if I grow the poles in the garden? What if the pole is itself a crop? Okay, well in this case, amaranth. Let's talk a little bit about amaranth. By the way, these are not Jimenez beans. These are a local heirloom variety. I call it Orlando's bean because I got it from an old farmer I used to work for, and it's basically not in the marketplace. You can't buy it anywhere. I can share them with someone. Very heavy yielding. Typical horticultural bean, beige with maroon stripes. It was grown by the Abenakis, probably originally in Farmington Falls in my area. And it's pretty much extinct. It probably would be if it hadn't been for Orlando keeping it going. And for me now. I'll make this little digression. Seeds, saving your own seeds. Most of you only see what is in the catalogs, in the marketplace. You don't know what you are missing. There is so much stuff out there that's your neighbors have it, or the U.S. government has it. There's so many varieties which are so uniquely, exquisitely adapted for your gardens, your cuisine, your style, your taste, and so on, that you don't find out about. Now, some of them, like this one, you can get that from me. Some Jimenez, if Fedco doesn't have it this year, I can give you some seeds. I can give you a packet of seeds. But if you want a lot of them, or if you want to grow them year after year, hey, I'm not a seed company. Don't come back to me year after year for that same thing. Save your own seeds. I will probably say that again. Learn to save your own seeds. Particularly of beans and tomatoes, they're a piece of cake. But also learn to save your own kohlrabi seeds and your own, yeah, what?
Will you talk a little bit about distance between and how you prevent...
crossing?
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to.
Okay.
Because we don't have all
it varies
the...
by crop and by
Well,
pole versus foot.
okay, this is a good opportunity for me to make a little plug. I have a book, Chelsea Green has asked me I'm doing this big book, and we're in the final finishing off stages of editing it. It does have a fairly thorough section on sexual propagation and asexual propagation, how to graft, how to grow seeds, and it'll be coming out next February.
Oh, wait.
If you can wait, that would be good. Because we're talking about the ball of wax we've already got here to melt right now is big enough. If we go off into seed saving classes, oh yeah, usually someone wants to talk on seed. That itself would be 4 hours, easily. So, and I can only tell you, in case of beans...
What's the name of the book?
Well, that's still...
yet?
my original title for my choice was was Gardens Without Borders. And the problem my editor had with it, and I agree with her, number one, it's not clear just what that means. After you've read a couple of pages in, it becomes very clear. I meant to start it off, what we're talking about. This I already did to you guys. But that doesn't help. The guy standing there at the Barnes & Noble looking at this thing, he's got to know what it's about, right, the title, not after he gets in the first few books. They suggest that I'm not totally happy with it. They think I'm a celebrity. They think all of you know who I am, and even people other parts of the country know Will Bonsall. So they're calling it Will Bonsall's Essential Guide, I don't know what the essential is, to something like Radical Self-Reliant Gardening. I think that's it. And then there's even a longer subtitle. It's okay, but I don't know.
Buzzwords kind of
And yeah, exactly. And it's Will Bonsall, because then down the bottom spot is Will Bonsall. Like, in case you didn't get it, I'm Will Bonsall. Anyway, I'm still loved. It's not cast in concrete yet, but I think the title you want to look for is Will Bonsall's something. So I'm going to get coming out this year, so it'll be. You'll be able to find it online or get on their mailing list or something. But it's very, very in-depth. I mean, they wanted a lot of it's based on this philosophy of, big picture, sustainability, for food, culture, everything, to try to be a more sustainable society. But it also has lots of little details, like I talk a lot about Jimenez being, things like that, too. So I hope I'm not being too forward in recommending it to you when it comes out. Anyway. And again, there's a lot of stuff about seed saving in it. We'll cover that. And there's also Suzanne Ashworth's book. There are other books out on, and they will tell you a lot about that. Yeah. But in case of beans, the good news is here in New England, for the most part, beans are completely self-pollinating, rarely cross-pollinating. So as far as how far apart to put them, don't worry about it. Okay. If they're close enough that the plants get tangled up and mechanically, that might be an issue. But as far as sexual hanky-panky, no problem. Okay. With carrots or other things, yes, you totally have to know that, but we won't go there right now. So anyway, okay, this is a variety of amaranth from Mexico. There are a lot of varieties. Some are more suitable here than others. I grow two varieties. Actually, I grow one for my own use. There's a variety from the high plains of Colorado called Plainsman. Gets whatever, about this tall, not very big. It's fairly early, doesn't yield half of what this one does, but it lends itself, because of its size, it lends itself to combining. Okay, I'm not combining. If you're going to go through the combine to get it all in one day, it ripens all at once, and it's fairly short and not a lot of biomass to it. If that's what you want, then Plainsman is what you want. It doesn't lend itself to planting beans in among it, especially pole beans. It's too short. This variety, which is from Mexico, Opopeo. Again, I can supply anyone who packs the seed if you want. O-P-O-P-E-O, Opopeo, which I believe is a town, I think, in Michoacan. I'm thinking, in the state of Michoacan, which, even though it's Mexican, it matures pretty well. It's a little late, but easily. I've grown it many years, and it always matures seed reliably for me, albeit a little late. But the nice thing about it is it gets to be often this tall. I've had it be 8 feet or more tall. And that's good. It may make it a little late, but in fact, some of these things, they have these huge stalks. Some of these things I think would grade out for veneer grade. You could use them for telephone pole or whatever. These are, pulpwood or whatever. Huge, heavy things. I have to chip them up to get them to compost. But the good thing about that is it makes a great support. Instead of cutting a Christmas tree and lopping the limbs off, or whatever, I got these things growing food. And so that's what's happened here. Now, let's digress a little too. Well, it's not really digressing at all. A little caveat here is you don't plant them at the same time. Can't plant. This is why. The Opopeo, the amaranth, can and should be planted. This, by the way, is a grain variety for growing yellow amaranth for grain, not a greens variety. Although you can. The foliage is excellent for that. It's not ideal for that. It can and really ought to be planted pretty much down here, I'm sure, at least early May. Where I am, by at least mid-May, and really by early May, I'll try to have them in. So they have time enough to mature. But also, the beans, of course, are frost tender. They can't be planted until where I am, till Memorial Day. I don't know what your calendar looks like, so I don't know how to calibrate this for you. But so I've got at least 3 weeks between the planting time of these two things. And it's just as well anyway. And the same thing, everything I'm saying for the moment about amaranth also applies to sunflowers, is the plant, amaranth is this little red thread-like plant. It kind of sits there like this for, boy, it seems like a couple of weeks. Is it growing? Is it alive? And then it kind of explodes. It seems to grow very, very fast. So if I were to plant, even if I could plant these at the same time, the pole beans were looking for something to climb on, and there'd be nothing but sky there. So this stuff needs to have a head start. My sunflowers I plant in hills, 3 per hill, and I want them to be 8 inches to a foot tall before I drill in the beans right into my finger. Again, you can't use machinery on this thing; it wouldn't work. You go in there and drill 4 or 5 beans in among each hill. And the reason that the way I got into the sunflower thing, that's what I discovered first before the amaranth, is for years we grew our sunflowers. We grow lots of sunflowers. We're vegans and we're trying to grow not just our salsa ingredients and our mesclun mixes, but our grain and our oil and our staple foods. And so we grew lots of sunflowers, originally with the intention of making our own oil. And that got abandoned and we picked it up again recently, but if we have time later I'll talk about that. We grew sunflowers to eat as sunflower seeds, as whole unprocessed seeds. And I planted them in blocks, not like most gardens have a row of them along the north side of the garden for the birds and to stop the wind and stuff. No, we'd have many rows of them, whole blocks of them. And typically I would put them the usual spacing of 3 feet between rows and about a foot between plants. The only problem with that, especially if most of my blocks were going east to west, so the prevailing wind, they would kind of make a sail, wall for the wind. And so some of especially when they got a little heavier with the ripening heads on them, would lodge, it would go over, and I'm losing some to whatever, mold, rot, broken, whatever. That was a problem, and it occurred to me, what if instead of planting these in these solid rows, if I planted them in hills, as one might plant, as the native people used to plant corn. Instead of planting 1 every foot, what if I planted 3 every 3 feet? Okay, and I tried that, and that was cool. That leaves these canyons going in both directions for the wind to get through. That actually worked very nicely. The only problem with it was every solution begets a problem. That's Will's theory of the universe. And every problem begets a solution. Okay. What would happen is because they're kind of crowded together, the sunflowers tend to lean out away from each other, and so some of them would lodge because of that as they ripen. Not the wind, but just their own, kind of get away from each other. Well, it occurs to me it does. What if I put a pole in there, but stake them up somehow? And I thought, well, wait a minute, these are poles, why shouldn't I? All I really need is something so they can't pull apart. Like, what if I just have the string? Instead of tying them, taking a string and tying them to a pole, just tie them to each other. Putting a little loop of string around it, just so they lean out away. Well, that's great, but almost immediately occurs to me is, what if instead of putting a string around, what if I grow a string around it? Yeah. What if the string is also edible? Okay. What if that's a crop? And so I think pole beans, I put among them. Now I plant them together. Again, I plant the sunflowers early in May, and not until Memorial, about 3 weeks later when the sunflowers are up several inches, if not a foot, then I drill in the pole beans. The pole beans sprout, come up. But each of those beans does not follow its respective plant. No, no. They just grow in among the whole hill, okay? And therefore, they tie them all together, okay? Yeah, Eva.
What variety of sunflowers are you?
Well, actually, the kind I grow, it's, yeah, and I got lots of it if anyone wants any. I don't know if it's any particular thing. Years ago, I was trying to get some confection type, the white, shell-out eating, fresh-eating sunflowers, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. What I found at Johnny's was they had some F1 hybrid variety. And what the hell, I got it. And ever since then, 20 years or something, I've been selecting from that, letting it stabilize, you might say dehybridizing it, and selecting it for certain qualities I wanted, head shape and height, stuff like that. And so I have this variety now, which I've named Standfast, after a community in my other book, my novel, which is out now, you can get it anytime you want. There's a Sperrian banner called Standfast, so I just stole the name. I did it with a couple of crops. I was trying to find a name. Instead of naming places for the, I took this fictional place and named the thing after it. I did with it with a pepper, too. Anyway, yeah. Sure.
Well, I had heard, I think through Eva, that you were doing the sunflowers and bean trellis. Did you run into fertility issues at all? Because I did the traditional planting this year, 1 foot spacing with mammoth grays, and pole beans side by side with the same soil in bamboo did fantastic, and the pole beans growing up the sunflowers did terrible. And they were only about 3 weeks difference for planting.
The pole beans seem to have a fertility issue.
The pole beans had a fertility issue.
Okay, are you sure it was a fertility issue and not a light issue?
No, I'm not, actually.
Because I was going to get to this a little later, but I think I'll, for the moment, hit on this point.
Okay.
When you put, this is a form of companion planting, which we'll discuss later. When you companion crops, let's take the example of sunflowers, and let's take the example of amaranth might work better that way. They're mostly parallel, but The amaranth I'll put about 1.5 to 2 feet in the row. So I'm putting them further apart than they often recommend, a foot apart. But it doesn't matter, they branch so much, I seem to get the same yield. Okay, the principle with any companion planting is not like you can put 2 crops together at 100% of their normal spacing that it would be alone, and expect to get 100% of each crop. You're not going to get 200% by companioning. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't need to. All you have to do is the sum of the 2 parts. It's got to be significantly more than 100%. If you follow that, here's where the theoretical numbers here, this may help you. So what I'm looking for, and this is one of the great examples of that. You might figure if you get 2 crops together, each one of them produces 75% of what it would have by itself, then you're getting 150%. So you've gained a lot by it. Okay, in this case, this is extreme case. The amaranth does what it would by itself, as if it were by. In other words, the beans neither help it nor hinder it at all. So the beans are gravy, whatever I get. So if you're growing sunflowers for sunflowers, and if it doesn't hurt your sunflower crop at all, and I don't believe it will. Now, I wasn't ready to get to this quite yet, but the conventional wisdom, I kind of need to. The conventional wisdom about companion planting is that, well, 2 different crops go well together because they repel each other's pests, or because they supply each other's nutrient needs. And as I'll describe in more detail later, that's mostly a bunch of hooey. There are some cases where it happens that way. But what we really need, so what I'm saying is, growing the pole beans and the sunflowers doesn't help them much at all. That nitrogen fixing all that, it's for the beans. And next year, those nodules will break down and fertilize whatever crop happens next year. Is it helping the sunflowers? Not significantly. Some people insist that there's a certain amount of, they leach, they give off some nitrogen while they're growing even. They help the things that are among them. That's not what makes it work. What makes it work, and this gets to your point, is you've got to have enough fertility there for the sunflowers. Don't count on the beans getting it. But if you've got enough, particularly potassium, they're big needers of potassium. I put a lot of wood ashes on corn and amaranth and sunflowers, but especially sunflowers. If you've got enough nitrogen and enough minerals and stuff there for the sunflowers, then they can have it all. They don't have to share it with the beans. Whatever the beans need, there's got to be enough there for them. But if there is, they don't have to share, like nitrogen, for example. Okay, they don't have to, whatever nitrogen the sunflowers have got, the beans don't need to share theirs with it. Okay, so what I think went wrong, why you got poor yield, I will typically get with these things, the amaranth and the sunflowers yield 100%. They're not adversely affected. Ironically, with the sunflowers and pole beans, if anything, the sunflowers yield a little more than 100%. In the sense that what they would have done by themselves, a certain amount of them would have gone over and lodged. Right. So I would have lost some, so the 100% is maybe, what would have been 90%, I really get the 100%, so let's call it 110%, if that all made sense. But in most cases, no, it's neutral. Neither the corn, nor the sunflowers, nor the amaranth gains anything by it. But it's not set back at all. So anything I get for beans will be gravy. And I don't get 100. The beans are adversely affected by the sunflowers or the amaranth. They don't yield. This last year I did actually some numbers, so compare them. And I even had how many pods per hill or per thing I got. I can't remember. I think it was like a couple hundred or no. Whatever it was, is the pole beans on this, because I had some others where there's some gaps, and I just put in a pole there. I had beans there and no amaranth plants, so I stuck in a pole. So I can really compare them, same beds and everything. And in those cases, I found that the sunflowers on the poles, put it this way, the sunflowers on the amaranth yielded 75% of what they did on the naked poles. So obviously I'm losing 25% there. So but think positively. That 75% is gravy compared to, so that might have been part of your issues, because it's the light. It's not a competition for resource, it's the light.
They were planted on the south side, but...
But didn't they all grow in among them and stuff?
They did, yeah. And unfortunately, it was for Fedco, so it was for seed, so that 25% yield was an issue.
Yeah,
before the tier work.
Because your crop was the beans there.
Yeah.
Your main crop was, yes, that is an issue. Then in a case like that, perhaps you should think about planting them by themselves, or plant a lot more of them.
Okay.
Plant 25% more to make it. But that makes sense mainly if your sunflowers are also a valuable crop to you. Not just something you're putting for the birds or whatever. And for me, they're a staple. But in some ways, the sunflowers are more important to me than the beans. I mean, they're one of my main sources of fat in my diet is sunflowers, along with other things like pumpkin seeds and poppy seeds and so on. But they're a major fat for me, and I want, and a lot of other trace minerals that oil seeds like sunflowers have, fluorine, silicon, iodine, whatever. So I want them. The beans are almost superfluous. And so 25% of superfluity is a great
75% gain.
Yeah, I'm happy with it. But again, all these things I mentioned, there'd be some reason why it will work and some reason why it might not work for some of you. We're talking about niche crops, we're talking about niche situations. For your purpose, this might not work because this is the thing you need. But given those things, then you can gain something from it, yeah.
How much amaranth would you typically get from one plant?
I couldn't tell you a plant, although I could if I thought it through a little. Okay, he wants numbers, I got some numbers here. 1 year, I put in 6 3 beds, so it's 6 40-foot rows, 240 feet, and we got, I think, roughly 30-something pounds from it. So a little over a pound per linear foot. Boy, was it that good? I think it was. It was, when I looked at it, after I threshed and winnowed them, and I had this bucket of amaranth, and it looked pretty damn disappointing. There's all that space, and that's what I've got from it. I mean, I would have had a lot more wheat than that, or corn or something. But then I picked up that bucket. And I came to realize all the stuff that they, the superlative stuff they say about the density, the nutritional stuff of amaranth, I can believe it.
Okay. And I've never grown it before, so when is it harvested?
You could be harvesting it now. It doesn't need to, I like to have most of mine be ripe by the first frost, but it's not killed by the first frost. It'll take several successive heavy killing frosts before the plant is totally done. But even then, I don't have to harvest it. Very often, I'll leave it as long as I can on the plant before I cut it, because it just keeps curing, and it does some after ripening. At which point, I'll pick off all the pods from it, get the dry beans, get them harvested, and then I'll lop off the, now in the case of Jimenez, again, the bottom, all this hole here is full of, it's going to take forever to dry, it's full of succulents. So I usually lop it off up here somewhere where the first, grain-bearing branches are. Take that, leave the rest to whatever, take the chainsaw to later or whatever, anyway. And take that and I'll hang them upside down in my, I'm getting to that, it's coming right up. I'll show you how I do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a suggestion for Phil. When you had that low yield, did you not get flowers or you didn't get beans?
I got both flowers and beans, but the leaves were really compromised.
Oh, so it didn't like not bloom?
No, it bloomed, yeah, and it bloomed and yielded, but just dramatically lower than the beans by themselves.
Oh.
That does sound, in spite of the south side thing, that does sound to me like they were not as much light as they would prefer, but I'm not sure. If you had plenty of fertility for the sunflowers, I don't think the beans would have been an issue for them. Beans do like, all legumes, keep in mind, conventional, quote, organic agriculture, organic is starting to be almost conventional itself. But usual way people go about it is we worship cow manure. That's almost, some people, that's the definition of moo-poo, is what makes organic distinct from other stuff. Instead of 10-10, we use moo-poo, and I don't use either. One of the problems with moo-poo is that is the same as the problem we have with 10-10-10. No humus. It's like here today, gone tomorrow. With cow manure, it's much better that way, but it's still not ideal. All the stuff in that just grass that's been through a cow's rumen, and it's good, maybe great for a year or so, but that humus is mineralized fairly quickly compared to a lot of the veganic plant-derived materials, which will last a whole lot more. And then we start talking about later about ramial chips and leaves and things, which the objection is often they take too long to break down. But during that time they're breaking down, they're a microcosm of biological activity. And so, anyway, the reason I'm mentioning all that is legumes think humus. Because the reason legumes are so efficient is, yes, they make their own nitrogen, they make it from what? The air we're breathing. Well, if there isn't enough air in the soil, that's why generally conventional legumes don't do as well in conventional soil, because it's packed or whatever, not enough humus. Anything adding humus, aside from the fertility value of the humus, aside from any kind of, what's in it, just simply letting them be lighter in area. It's a little bit like, kind of like bran in your stomach or something. Keep stuff separate so that things can act on things, so enzyme stuff. Sorry, you were...
Yeah, I don't have a farm, so I'm gardening in containers.
Yeah.
And it has actually forced me to learn some things that might not be so noticeable on a farm.
Yeah.
You use up your fertilizer really fast.
Yes.
And, I have big containers, but still.
Yeah, you can't miss it in those.
So I just wanted to say for that fellow, he might try. I grew a lot of hot peppers, and I had my problems there first because they really eat a lot of stuff up.
Yeah.
But I learned that things don't bloom. I think it's sulfur, but you put Epsom salts in. If you don't have enough of that, your plant will never even bloom. And I learned it for the peppers and the tomatoes, but I discovered it does it on everything, including my beans. So I now put Epsom salts in all the containers, and it's amazing. I'll get an explosion
Yeah.
of blooms. And then the other thing I learned, which I learned from tomatoes, is that, you know, they can get blossom end rot. I put calcium in, and I discovered they ripen faster. The more calcium I put, the faster they ripen. And also the beans, the same problem. So I'm wondering if the sunflowers maybe also use a lot of calcium, and if his dirt was just in the borderline, it may have, you know, tipped the balance, or the magnesium and the sulfur. It's like, sometimes if your dirt is just on the borderline, your soil, if you have, you know, a thing. I mean, I try to put eggshells in for the calcium, but that's thinking ahead.
Yeah, right, it's not
I'll break
immediately
down really
available, yeah.
quickly.
Well, those are all really good points. I make it, in this upcoming book, let's call it Gardens Without Borders for now, Will Bonsall's, whatever it is. There's a major section of it devoted to the topic of minerals. And minerals are something generally we bring in, we buy in from somewhere, from a phosphate deposit somewhere, or an extinct lake bed somewhere, whatever, something or other. And my feeling is, how organic is that? And how sustainable is it? These things come in with a major expense and major environmental expense, carbon footprint and stuff. But that being said, my farm is basically, I'm farming on unsorted glacial debris, stuff that the glacier ground up, and those rocks that are ground up came from all over Quebec, Labrador, northern Maine, or whatever, and it's very unlikely that any trace mineral was not in those. However, it's entirely possible that my previous owners, farming and sending all this stuff off to the marketplace. By the way, in my opinion, there are two major sources of erosion. One is leaching and volatilization, loss of minerals that way, and the second one is the marketplace. We don't think of that as erosion because that's what we're doing it for, But all this crop that we send off, all these tons of minerals that we send off to the marketplace, and they ain't never coming back.
Right.
There was a day, centuries ago, when that stuff, in the form of night soil, would have been brought back to the land, and often the land that produced it, and so you'd have a closed circle. We've broken that closed circle. And so we have these mineral, and especially if you're in soil, which you might have here, I wouldn't be at all surprised, a lot of have sandy soils, that those minerals may have not been there to begin with, or if they were, they're so leached out or volatilized that you've got to bring them in. And in those cases, I say, yeah, bring them in by all means, whatever it costs to get them. But ideally, do what your soil needs. Lots of humus, lots of things, to make sure those minerals stay there. So you don't have to bring in the same minerals year after year after year. And again, you have this problem if you're sending stuff to the marketplace, then how do you get them back and whence?
I'm afraid to ask, what is night soil?
Oh, human doo-doo. Humanure sometimes called, yeah. They're all euphemisms, yeah.
I knew that.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Sure,
okay.
anyway. I was pretty sure, I heard you in Maine. I hear you use that word.
And incredibly rich. I mean, night soil is far, as rich as pig shit is and chicken for stuff. It's mainly because those animals eat so well. Well, nothing eats better than us. And so our doo-doo, therefore our doo-doo is full of all kinds of stuff. That's part of the reason it smells so bad. That's part of the reason it's so, problematic. But it's also one reason why it should not be wasted. It should go, and mine is. I have a closed system where mine ends up fertilizing corn and sunflowers and things like that.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to, staying on that subject, how do you compost that? If you have a compostable toilet and you're composting
I don't have
above ground?
compostable toilet. There's a bucket in the cellar. There's what's supposed to was.
Do you do it
bought
below
as a
ground in the winter?
Well, I have a privy, and I go to the privy and do my business there. The rest of the family does not like to use the privy, especially the kids, especially in the wintertime. So we have in the bathroom we bought a composting privy without the composting part of it. Basically, there's the commode, I think you sit on, and a pipe going down 8 feet down to the cellar, where there's a bucket. It's in a closed stainless steel chamber, so it's the area, it's all and vented. So it stays sanitary and no one smells or sees or has to deal with it, except me. A couple times a week I gotta take that bucket out and haul it to the compost pile. Where twice a year, late fall and early spring, it gets taken out, and I have a separate compost system. That's the real answer to your question. I have 2 bins where it gets mixed with shredded leaves. It already has lots of shredded leaves in it, plus the paper that every time everyone goes, you throw some shredded leaves down there. The conventional, they usually try to get you to buy peat moss, sphagnum on there. Shredded leaves works so much better. It's very absorbent of odors, but also you're adding major nutrients to it, which you're not with peat moss. So the leaves themselves are probably almost as, except for nitrogen, are probably as valuable as the night soil. And then it gets composted, it gets turned twice before it goes back in the land. Hold on one second, please, because someone here had to
Oh, just about your, back to sunflowers, but we can get to that.
Okay, hold that thought.
The leaves.
Okay.
Are you using oak leaves as well as?
I'm not, I am some. I'm mainly using maple leaves, this is what I have. If I had oak leaves, and I know down in this area you have lots of oak, use it.
It's too acidic though?
The acid in oak leaves is tannic acid, and tannic acid is very breakdownable, very labile and volatile, all that kind of stuff.
If you have hot compost.
Fine in compost would be great, but even using it directly. Some years, some sections of my compost pile, stuff I haul from Farmington, will have sometimes will have a lot of oak leaves in it, and I usually make no distinction, and beech leaves likewise. It's not so much the acidity that concerns me as that waxy cuticle that poplar and oak and beech have. And I don't use any leaves whole. They go through my chipper shredder, they come out like confetti, and therefore that cuticle is not a problem. And within, I don't know times or numbers, but within a very short time, when I mulch something with shredded leaves on top of my crop, I never, ever have seen a problem that I could attribute to acidity. And I think, again, I'm not plowing it under, it's right on the top. By the time that stuff leaches into the soil, it is so broken down it's turned into carbon dioxide and whatever. I'm saying that empirically, I mean, that's what I'm from observation, that it might be very different if I plowed them under, rototilled them in directly, but putting them on the soil, the acidity thing, I think is extremely ephemeral, very short-lived, and disappears before it gets to the root zone. I've never seen an issue there. And I have a problem with, most of Maine, it's a problem with soil acidity. You know, I have to be careful about putting anything that's acid on it. Yeah, so Eve, did we get?
Oh, it's just you know, back to the sunflower thing. Your sunflower that you have bred backwards, do you breed for less leaves that don't shade as much?
No.
And what's the,
No.
So yours would have the
I'm
same.
selecting for a certain height, I don't want it to be huge, about this height, and I'm selecting partly for, I'm not selecting a lot at all, I'm selecting somewhat for uniformity, because when you take an F1 hybrid and you know, it tends to go to pieces, you know, fractionates or whatever. I'm selecting partly for good, I don't prefer heads, and it's hard to select away from. I'd like a more flat disc shape, not so much that basin shape, that when it lays over and water sits in it and stuff like that. I'd like to get rid of, I'm selecting somewhat against that.
How big is the head on these?
Medium, not huge, not huge. It's not like those giant, great things. Medium size, that's fine with me. I'm not, and I'm getting 3 of those per hill. So yeah.
And you know about eating the that little layer between the young seed and the bottom of the head? It's a sort of a foam. It looks almost like styrofoam.
I know what you mean.
And
is it tasty?
It's a cool thing now in the chef world to actually
That's why I never heard.
graze those.
Totally uncool.
But anyway, it's just another edible thing on your sunflowers.
Well,
you know
what
about
I've
it?
experienced.
What are you referring to?
Interesting you mentioned that.
I couldn't catch what.
The
Oh,
flesh between
it
the
tastes good.
seed.
There's on a young
Spongy
sunflower head, before the seeds are totally mature, but pretty far toward that, there's a layer of white foamy material that tastes and behaves a little bit like artichoke hearts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which they're related to, by the way. They're you know, chicory and lettuce and dandelion, all those things are fairly closely related.
Well, anyway,
I like
it's
them
good.
with
It's just
compost.
another food to have from your
Yeah,
sunflower.
however, how do you harvest that without, don't you sacrifice the sunflower seeds?
You do, but
Oh.
if one falls down, or you have more than you need,
Oh,
anyway,
as a salvaging,
another.
or late in the season if there's some that don't
Yeah.
make it. Especially with some that are polycephalic, I select for, you know, one single head, but a
Yeah.
lot of varieties, a lot of the ones that are grown in, I got several varieties from East Africa that are grown for oil seed, and they don't care necessarily, so they get a cluster of small ones, that's just, for their purpose, just fine.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes mine will act that way. I'll have a certain plant that's a little immature one. That would work fine. I tried experimenting before with just an immature sunflower head and steaming, using them kind of like that. And the real problem is that most of the head, including the unripe seed, have a horrible resinous taste to them. And apparently this particular part you're talking about must not have that. Or the steaming cooks get totally...
Also, I heard recently about fermenting sunflower heads. That, I mean, a guy that I know who does a lot of fermenting in Boston did Jeff Lucas, L-U-K-A-S. I don't know if you've run across that.
No, but I heard of
He
him.
made some. He said I gave him some small sunflowers heads that we had grown just as ornamentals, and he fermented them with.
There were still flowers, they hadn't really, the seed hadn't really developed much
No,
of
the seed had
Really?
partially developed, yeah, and some of them were, they weren't totally mature, but again, they were partway there.
Yeah.
And he fermented them with honey, and he said it was fabulous. I did not taste them, but it's something to just know about.
Just that's distantly apropos of that, one thing I've tried to, we'll talk later about salsify. Second year salsify, when it makes flowers, they've taken those before they open up and make the big giant dandelion on, and tried steaming those, kind of like a broccoli kind of a thing, or like, again, they're the same family with both globe artichokes and also Jerusalem artichokes and cardoon. Those things are all really closely related. But yeah.
You mentioned the soil in Maine was acidic. I just wanted to share one other thing that I've learned partly because of the intensification of the containers.
Mm-hmm.
Any one of us who lives in an urban area, I don't know how many people, if you're trying to farm organic, actually use like public water as opposed to rainwater. The water in the cities here is pH adjusted to 7.5 or 8.
It's mildly alkaline.
8.5 is legal because of the lead in the pipes. And when you put the water on your plants, the H2O goes into the plant and evaporates, and the chemicals which make it as alkaline build up.
Yeah.
And in Providence, we have a problem with actual lead plumbing, not just lead joints.
Yeah.
And there's an exemption, and the pH of the water, I took care of a pool publicly, so I found out, the pH of our water is 10. Ammonia's 11.
Yeah.
And when I found that out, I made up rain barrels right away.
Yeah.
And the difference in my plants was phenomenal.
Yeah.
But the problem is, even all those years, you've been putting this alkaline in your soil, and just like alkaline water doesn't take up the lead, alkaline soil and water doesn't dissolve the minerals and bring them up into the plant. So your plant could be sitting in the compost pile and not be nourished.
Yeah, you're right. That's the phenomenon. You have a lot of arid soils, prairie soils, irrigating gardens will cause that problem, building up of alkaline. I mean, that's the whole civilizations have fallen because of that.
Right. So it's a good idea to test.
Which is another thing in favor of constantly covering the ground, which I'll be discussing later. Universal mulch and intensiveness and so on. The less water you use, then the less you have that phenomenon of building up. Now in Maine, we could use a little more buildup of alkaline, but yeah, anywhere it's ultimately a problem.
I'll send you mine.
Yeah.
It's not nice alkaline, though. You don't want our alkaline.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we're back to this. All of these are basically ways of growing, use that third dimension. Either putting a support trellis for it, or the ideal case is where you have, the trellis itself is a crop. And again, as I pointed out before, with my pole beans that I grow this way, I'm finding about 75%. Up until this year, it was guesswork. I couldn't have given, now I can give you, hey, there's a number for you, of what they would be by themselves. And that is very, I always guessed it was 60 or 70%, and it was a little better than that. And I did a number of hills to get a good, statistically valid thing. That's huge. 175% yield. Not doubling my crop, but geez, I'll take that any day. And relatively easy. The real thing, yeah, go ahead.
Have you found a reason why the amaranth or the sunflowers is preferable to corn as a living trellis?
For me, where I am, the varieties of corn, sweet corn or field corn, that mature reliably are typically not much taller than that. And not the big heavy. If I lived in the corn belt and had big heavy corn stalks, then I might be more likely to try interplanting corn with it. I have a whole other thing I do with corn that works a whole lot better, which I'll get to quite soon. Otherwise it might work as well. It's mainly a case of the physical, the strength of the structure and how tall it gets and things like that. I need something. If I were to try to grow companion regular beans in corn, I think I would use semi-runner varieties. Like there's some semi-running, like a lot of the turtle beans and pinto beans are actually semi-runners. They're between bush and a pole bean. They're intermediate, and they would probably work fine with that. But I've got a whole other thing which I'll get to soon. Okay, so here we go. Whoop, whoop, hey, what happened? It wouldn't obey me, and now all of a sudden it obeys me all at once. There we are. Okay, just a different view. Rows of amaranth with pole beans growing up them. More the same. Yeah, it happens wicked cunning too, isn't it? That's kind of nice. Food doesn't always get us pretty.
Is that opepeo?
This is again opepeo with that. I think it's Orlando is being grown. I also In recent years, I've been also, because I'm getting more and more into the three-dimensional thing, I thought, would it be nice for dry beans if some of these beans I like growing as bush beans could be a pole. For example, if there were a pole version of Jacob's cattle bean. In fact, I think there is, but I haven't done it. Or a pole version of pinto bean. Well, I found there is. I've got at least one variety called Roark, which is a pole bean, but it is basically a pinto bean. Looks like one, acts like one. And so that's what this year, this I think is Orlando's. Yeah, I see the streaks on it. But the Roark is just plain green. And I grew a lot of those this year, and it performed also very well. So now I've got pinto beans. Instead of wasting space growing bush pintos, I can grow them on my tall crops. There's still plenty of reasons that I still grow bush beans, different types. But the more I can do this, the more I'm getting more food per piece of ground.
What's your total acreage under cultivation?
Oh, not counting the scatter seed project. It used to, for many years, it was 7/8 of an acre. Now it's a little bit more than that. Yes. Yeah, sounds pretty small, doesn't it? And this is producing our food, a big percentage of the food that we eat. Not all of our grain. It's we're still buying most of our wheat and some of our sunflower seeds, some of the other things, but that area can produce. In fact, now that I've added on some more, like an acre, it's less than an acre and a quarter now. I think would if I were to plant a lot more wheat. I'm mainly using the extra space to do more green manure to reduce the need for composting and whatever to build up my soil. But that amount of space could grow all of everything I use, I'm sure of it.
How many people eat?
4 people.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the caveat I should add to that, in recent years, it's a lot of those foods my wife isn't eating because she's got a bladder problem. She can't, tomatoes, this whole bunch of things that she's not eating at all. My kids are both in college now. They're mostly eating away when they come home. Okay. And also they're finicky about some of these foods that I grow a lot of that they don't. A good example, amaranth. Amaranth, I can grow a lot. I can grow like 30 pounds a year is plenty enough for me. And I could grow more, but I don't need to. My boys, and the same thing with sunflower seeds. I grow sunflower seeds, I grow wheat, I grow a whole lot of these different things. But the kids generally don't want to grow anything that Daddy grows out there in the dirt. You know? Yeah, they've been encouraged by their mother, I guess, to have this sort of prejudice against homegrown, especially the oldest one. And so the way I found of getting around it is I grind up, I don't give them amaranth, feed as amaranth. I grind it up. It takes 4 times through the grinder. It's not very hard work, but it takes repeated to get it because it's small and hard to get it so it's anywhere near being flour. 4 times through amaranth flour, grind up sunflower meal into an oily meal. Oats, we grow naked oats, hullus oats, grind those up, and a little bit of wheat. Those 4 things, put them together every Saturday morning. We have waffles. And my kids line up to snarf down lots of amaranth and naked oats and sunflower seeds, all that stuff that Daddy grew in the dirt. If any of your other briefs use a word, I'll do you in. That's just the way. Don't let them know that. They're eating lots of this stuff and they don't notice it. Anyway.
How old are your children?
Well, they're now Kendall's 18, going on 19, and 22.
Give it a few years when their friend.
Yeah, when they're buying their own food, they might feel a little bit.
Well, when their friend, when they have a friend who's majored in nutrition and says,
maybe, yeah, shames
them on Facebook. That's what happened to my son.
I know.
It's like he was raised on everything we raised, goat meat, goat milk, and then when he was old enough to buy his own food, nothing brown. He only ate white food until someone shamed him, and now he's. Well,
my kids are more complicated than that. They kind of like ours now. Kendall, the youngest one, he's now eating in the food plant, the cafeteria. And I've asked him, we're vegans, and our kids were raised vegan, but we never made any effort to make them vegan. And it's curiously enough that when they're out on them, we let them make their own choices. Kendall, if he's out with his team, they have pizza or something, they have cheese on it, he doesn't complain about it. Several parents have said, he's eating meat here, I served it, he doesn't make a fuss about it. But therefore, I thought he was kind of omnivorous, didn't care about it. Well, recently he explained to me that at the food day, the cafeteria at school, they have a very good supply of vegan food, very good variety of things, and whole and vegetables and stuff like that. And he says, and it tastes fine. He says he doesn't feel any tempted. He doesn't want to eat meat. He doesn't. If you offer him some, then and that's all there is. He's not going to be, gauche about it. But on the other hand, it's not his preference. So both of them seem to be vegans for their own reasons, which I'm glad. If they go, I don't want necessarily to follow in Daddy's footsteps or feel that they need to do it, but they have their own reasons for liking this or whatever they are. And But, yeah, they kind of are. The last weekend, Kendall was home, and he said, it's really good there, but it's really nice to eat at home, because there's stuff, like, they don't have anything like this there. And it wasn't that long ago, then like he said, there was like, this is stuff that Daddy grew in the dirt. But now even the vegan whole food at the cafeteria is somehow, and I couldn't get any details about, how is it? It's not like the stuff that we're getting at home.
Lacking.
I don't know. I think it doesn't have enough love in it, I think is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Almost any kind of food that has love in it will taste pretty good.
My kids, as they're slightly older, mix the vegetables from the garden with ramen noodles.
Yeah.
Ramen noodles.
Which is kind of their compromise.
Ramen.
Oh,
Yeah.
Ramen noodles is
Yeah. I think dog boogers would probably taste fine with
Right.
ginger and some of those things. Right. Anyway, moving right along here, Miss Piggy. Okay. Hanging in the barn. This has been harvested. Now it doesn't look so pretty anymore. It's all colors all gone from it. It's hanging upside down. Big stalks branching. There should be a tarp under this with some of the shadows on the floor. And after it gets a couple more weeks, they're right now when I get home, a couple days, I'll start spreading our tarp on the floor and start stomping. I think I got a picture of it here. Sometimes they do it outdoors. Here it's on a tarp outdoors, and doing the chicken on it, and doing it sideways, threshing it with a flail like I do grains and stuff. Doesn't work. Those big saw logs in there keep getting away, and I probably could put it through the chipper shredder. I bet we'd do a wonderful job of it. I never have, and then clean it out real good before and after. But anyway, I do this. It comes out very easily, and I winnow it in a bucket on a breezy day and so forth, and get, like I say, a half a bucket or a bucket of very tasty amaranth. Yeah.
Do you find a lot of it falling out as you're harvesting?
No. Well, I'm glad you put it that way. No, I don't find a lot of it.
Yeah, okay.
It doesn't seem to. It doesn't
Right.
seem to. I pay some attention. I look around the ground. I'm not seeing it. But amaranth is pretty fine. So I don't know how much I'm losing.
Okay.
But it doesn't appear to be much at all.
I was just curious because you said that you'll leave it, as late as possible for it to cure. Where I find that I'm off is that I'm a little obsessive about it, so I want to harvest it early before it's falling, but then it's probably not cured all the way, and then.
But there's value to what you're saying. It may be better because if it's ripe enough but not cured, you want to make sure it's good and ripe. I could get mine a couple of weeks earlier and let it do the curing in the shed longer than I do. I have so many things going on. I'll leave it out as long as I can. My greater concern is I'm hoping the birds aren't. I'm watching it for sparrows and stuff getting it. And if they're not getting it, then I'm not too worried. I've sometimes had it snow, and we've already had snow come and go, and mine's harvested now, but I wouldn't be worried if it were there right now.
Okay.
Well, you'd find it volunteering, wouldn't you, the next year?
That's a really good point, and I'm not finding it volunteering
If you
much.
don't find it much volunteering, I wouldn't think you'd do it.
Oh, so right, that's a very good point. I have some.
Squirrels may clean it up too.
I find it volunteering in the greenhouse, but
That's
not
pretty
in the
small
field.
stuff. I mean,
I'll have a volunteer in the field there'll be pigweed, and I can usually tell them apart. They're very, very similar.
Right.
But it's redder and a little more robust plants and stuff. I can usually see it when it's there, and sometimes I do. But usually it's where a thing broke off and was left lying there, never got taken to compost or harvested. Then next year I find a little clump of it there. So yeah, I feel more emboldened than to say I don't find that it's shattering much, and I don't think I'm getting much bird loss to it. There was one year I know with the short one, the plainsman variety, that I could see they were in it and they were doing some damage, serious damage to it, but ordinarily not, and I'm not sure why and why not. Okay, so amaranth, which is, by the way, this is one of the things I told you, some of the dry beans I grow in there. These are, and I mentioned these, they're also kind of a very minor crop that you ought to know about. These are white runner beans. You all know scarlet runner beans?
Yep.
And there are different species of bean, Phaseolus coccineus. Coccineus means scarlet. But there are varieties, strains of scarlet runner beans, which are not scarlet. Some of them are mixed. They're brown and different variations of it. But the main other type of them is all white ones. And there are a lot of heirloom in the United States and parts of Canada and in Britain. There are a lot of people, a lot of communities have heirloom white runner beans. And they are almost always called lima beans. The first time I discovered this, Orlando Small, who I got the pole bean run, he showed me, pointed out in his garden, as we were coming down from haying and driving by his garden. Got some runner beans that are doing really well. Wow, runner beans, I didn't think they would grow. I've never had any luck maturing, even bush lima beans, I meant to say. Lima beans, I never had any luck with them. And yet his are doing great, and showed me the barn. He had a lot of full pods to be cleaned out. And I was very impressed, and I got that variety from him, and I labeled it, I called it Orlando's. Actually, Small's Carolina, it's Orlando Small. He got it from a neighbor who brought it back from North Carolina way back, I don't know, decades ago, coming back from Florida. And he's been keeping it ever since. And I got it from him, and Small's Carolina Lima. This one is a New Hampshire heirloom variety called Granny Tilly. And anyway, it's not a lima bean. That's a Phaseolus lunatus. It's different, but the beans are almost exactly like lima beans in flavor, in appearance, except they're fatter. Even now, they're very fat. They're the largest, plumpest bean there is. They get really big. But the taste, especially in the shell bean stage, is dead ringer for lima beans. So I call this the Northern Gardener's lima bean. If you have difficulty maturing limas, you want to grow pole runners. And again, these could grow, and I grow them on my amaranth or sunflowers, usually on the amaranth. Yeah.
Just, when I have grown scarlet runner beans, I was amazed at the size and the bulk. Now, ratio of weight of actual bean per square foot of area, would you get more in the either the white or the scarlet runner beans than you would just because the seeds are so huge?
More than common beans?
Than for other kinds of pole beans that you grow.
It's a good question, and I don't know. I haven't grown these enough to have a good comparison. Several times I've grown them, but I always grow the other kind. Boy, you could be right. I don't know.
That might be, it might be a lot.
And I'll get lots of pods on them. They need a somewhat longer seed. I want to be sure and get them in early enough. I'm not in the banana belt. I have a marginal climate to get a lot of. But if I'm growing them for green shallow, like frozen lima beans, I don't doubt they probably would. They are very fat, very much faster to shell out than lima beans, because again,
that's another labor saving.
At least twice as much per pod.
Yeah.
And a lot of pods per plant. And again, I will get them. It's kind of irrelevant to make comparisons with them with lima beans because I'm not going to get lima beans of any stage.
Tilly beans you're talking about?
Yeah, they're using them as jelly beans instead. This year I got. They did very poorly this year. They were in different crops, always on sunflowers in several different places in the garden, and none of them got weeded well. So I had a lousy crop, way under half of what I should have gotten from them. The sunflowers, in most cases, did nothing at all. But I had a mix because they were latent because of that. So I got a lot more than I wanted, really, of green, lima beans, as opposed to dry beans. I was wanting to get more dry beans. Ordinarily I would, but there is this issue with the down here. I think it'd be irrelevant for you. I think you could easily mature them all to either whatever stage you want. So anyway, I was showing those because they're really, really, really nice. They're really good. One of our favorite ways of eating is succotash. Have them with sweet corn, chopped off the cob, and a little bit of bell pepper mixed with it. I mean, once you've had that stuff, sex will seem boring. I mean, this stuff is really perfect. It's really, really one of the nicest ways of eating. Anyway. Come on. Then when it goes, it's going to jump ahead to the next 5. There we go. Whoops, see, I told you. Well, the only reason I was going to go back, now it's going to go back to 4 or 5. Doggone it. Obey me. But I get one more. I only showing this one. I was trying to emphasize that, as I mentioned, in Maine, our land is very steeply sloping. And so we have to, but anyway, even the pine trees are like that. But here we have it. Whoops, jeez. Anyone know what the trick is with these guys? It steals my thunder. You get a preview of the next one. I'm not supposed to, you're not supposed to see that yet. It's like Christmas stockings or something. Anyway, this is how we grow it in terraces. And as you can see, this is an old Maine variety of a caning sweet corn called Baxter's. It's a sweet corn. It was originally by the Baxter Canning Company, which had canneries over Maine and northern New Hampshire and Vermont. And this is the variety that their growers grew. And bodacious, nice, particularly heavy plants for me. A lot of corns, I can't grow just all the heavy yielding late corns. I need early like golden bantam and those kind of things. And lots of biomass and great yield. I'm going to show you the ears after, incredible ears. Very, very tasty. I mean, all these new sugar enhanced corns, which like bubble gum, they have, they're very sweet but nothing else. And they very fussy to grow. The seed mold is easy. This is corn flavor. For anyone that really wants corn on the cob to taste corny, this is it. It's really good. But what you don't see here, unless you look very carefully, it doesn't show up much. Here and there, you'll see some little, well, I got other pictures show it a lot more. It looks incidental, but what I get off from it is very, very valuable.
And this is bodacious?
No, I know you use that word a lot. There is a variety called bodacious, a new variety, it's a hybrid or something.
Oh, I see.
No,
What is this? Baxter?
Baxter.
Baxter, okay.
Baxter.
Baxter?
Not on the market, yeah. I got it from the USDA. It was extinct, commercially extinct, would be extinct, except they have it in the USDA, the corn collection at Iowa State.
Like your state farm.
And I got a packet from them of like 50 seeds or so, and I've propagated it since then. Currently, I do not have enough to share with anyone, because I had a very bad, I had not a crop failure this year, but I had a failure of corn seed this year. I got a lot of sweet corn, but didn't make it, thanks to raccoons mainly.
What's that, about 7 feet tall?
Oh, I bet you. Yeah, yeah. Which is, usually those taller corns, that taller or taller, don't do well for me. They're kind of like, anyway, you can get this from the USDA, a little packet size. Ordinarily, you can get it from me, but not this year. Hopefully next year I'll have it available. So meanwhile, grow whatever you've been growing, whatever. But it's a great variety. Another one we like very much is Peas Crosby. It's another old Maine heirloom corn, which is white corn. Now, ordinarily, I don't care much for white corn. This is big ears, very heavy yielding, and sometimes I like them as well or better. But anyway, great yielding corn. Now, a little closer up, you see, in with it, there's something hiding. Edamame, vegetable soybeans, were planted on the same day that the corn was. Unlike those other things 3 weeks apart, these both go in first or second, middle of May, or maybe even a week before, when the soil's warm enough. I make the furrow, and usually I put in composted night soil. And that's one of the few things I use it on is corn and corn, squash, pumpkins. Anyway, put it in the furrow, put in the corn seeds at the normal spacing. Furrows are 3 feet apart and a foot between corn plants. So the corn is at yeah.
Say it again, please, Will. How far apart?
3 feet between rows, 36 inches between rows, and 12 inches within the row. That's the traditional common spacing for sweet corn. So I'm planting, let's say I'm planting at 100% spacing. And we're hoping we're going to get 100% yield. And I am. I put the soybeans in right in the same time before I bury right in the same furrow. I don't even worry about alternating. I used to try to put between every corn. I don't even worry about that. Just drop them in every 6 inches or so. So there's typically about 2 soybean plants for every corn, if they all come up. The corn, again, I want something more than 100%. I don't expect to get 200%. The corn is unaffected, as far as I can tell, in any way, neither helped nor hindered by the soy. I get 100% of that crop. So again, anything I get, whatever I get from the soy will be gravy. In fact, I don't get 100% of the edamame. I only get like maybe, again, 60%, maybe better, of what it would have been by itself. But that's 160%. 2 exquisite crops, tasting really, really good. But again, in fact, typically I'll harvest them at the same time. When I'm going and getting a dozen ears of corn, I'll also get strip off the pods from a few plants and steam them and squeeze them, shell them out together, and put them together. We call it Chinese succotash. Edamame with corn and a little bell pepper, and again, exquisite tasting. Really, really one of the nicest ways of eating either of those crops. Very, very tasty. But now, there's a further dimension to this, which I'll get to later. That's not the only crop coming out from this piece, but I've already got 2 crops, which are much more than the sum of their separate parts. Okay, just close up. See, hiding down there, there's the, whoops, not very good focus on this. This is looking straight down, so you see the blur here.
That's pretty high yield. What kind of edamame is that?
Most of the variety that I grow is Shirofumi. Some years I also grow Beer Friend. Midori, giant Midori is another really good one. I like it a lot. They're all good. To me, edamame, it's kind of like my brother says about kisses. Some's better than others. Ain't none of them bad. I love edamame of any, but.
So what was the first one you said?
Shirofumi. Shiro, I think, is white in Japanese. White or yellow. I don't know fumi. Don't know what's Japanese. But Midori is, if you want a bigger one, which I guess is good if you want to get easier shelling out, then Midori is probably one to go with. It still matures easily. This year I grew 3 or 4 of them, and they all did very well. The problem was the lack of labor. I thought some of them went, a lot of them got by me. Got too old to harvest, and so I've got a lot more seed than I really want or need. If anyone wants, I've got a whole lot of, there was one section, got a whole lot of seed that's a mixture of those. I can't tell what they are. I'm going to use it next year. I'm going to plant a lot of it because, again, it's all fine. And I've got more than I possibly want. So if anyone wants some edamame that they don't care to know this year what it is, and then the 2 varieties that I collected that I know what they are, I'll keep them carefully marked and better than I did this year, and I'll have those for the following year. Anyway, well, wonderful, wonderful food. By the way, lots of, usually we use stir fry or like I say, a Chinese succotash, but another way that Cousin Tom came up with for using edamame, that's really great, and a lot of legumes in the shell stage work this way, is, and I do it now, he blends it, puts it in the blender, need a little bit of water because otherwise it just sits there, doesn't move around, blend it with thick cream, and then he adds typically, as do I, lemon juice, which I don't grow, garlic powder, which I do grow and make, and salt. And it's basically like hummus.
Hummus, it's hummus, right.
Yeah, Chinese hummus. And as a spread on stuff, you get large amounts of it. You can put it on real thick and eat lots of greens. So there's no problem using edamame, getting all you want of them. Hundreds of ways to use it. I do that same thing, by the way, with fava beans in the green stage. I don't do it with peas. If I were doing it with peas, I would do it with what the British call mushy peas. There's peas that are not like we, like petit pois, there's nothing to them, but almost mature, gone by peas. But I've done it with shell beans and white runner beans. Again, mash them up with some lemon juice or quince juice. I can't grow lemons. I've tried it before. I don't regularly do it with using quince juice.
I've done it with lentils.
Lentils would work out, except lentils are difficult to grow. I grow lentils sometimes.
I didn't grow those, but
yeah, but it would work with them totally. Yeah, they're not really good yielding. They can be grown here, but not as easily. The other legumes all do very, very easily. Okay, so. I hope someone else is keeping track of time. I have no idea how we're doing time.
2:30.
Okay. Oh wow. Oh, we should move along, I guess then. Okay, edamame. How's that? I don't know what that would cost you to buy those frozen in the health food store. It'd be a fortune for those. Tons of them. They just came from space. In addition to the corn, they're an extra.
Well, that 3 feet spacing between rows of the corn. What does John Jevons suggest on that?
Good question. I don't know.
It's
I don't
closer.
know. I've read his stuff, but not recently. They might. I wouldn't be surprised if they might go with a closer spacing and put a lot of crops. There's a very good point with a lot of these companion crops, which I'm about to get to.
All right.
Well, no, that's all right. Is the reason for that spacing is not because the plant needs it, and it's because the rototiller needs it, or tractor needs it. Now, in the case of corn, I don't know that that's completely true. I think you couldn't crowd too much beyond that without suffering, because the corn wants a lot of that 3 feet. But I don't know, but I think it's not completely true. I think one could grow. Potatoes, we put them 3 feet apart, mainly because we need to hill them up. Otherwise, we could put them a foot or a foot and a half apart in every direction. We could probably easily double, if not quadruple.
It's hard to hill them.
You can't hill them, and I've had, every year I do conventional hilling and also do growing them in hay method, and the hay, it's always, I'm ambivalent about it. There's some wonderful things about it. It's beautiful in some ways, but boy, I'm getting tired of green skin potatoes because I don't cover them. Most of them are not for it. What I'm trying to do is mulch them heavily with hay, and then later in the season as the tubers form, mulch them also heavily with shredded leaves on top of that, which will kind of sift in among the hay and make a much denser, light repelling mulch. But the answer to your question is that I don't know how Jevons does it.
So you've never tried anything closer than 3 feet?
I have not. Many years ago I had sweet corn, and I had it, but this may help a little. I had sweet corn, I think I had it like 2 or 2.5 feet. 2.5 feet I don't think is too much work, especially with sweet corn. I think 30 inches is not bad. 24 inches when I did that time, it was kind of crowded. It wasn't quite as good. And just awkward to work among it, too. It's also, some of it is what our bodies need. Yeah, comfort load. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't grow sweet corn, but we grow popcorn and flour corn, 4 rows in a 60-inch bed, or 64-inch bed.
How far apart between
They're
rows?
about 10 inches.
Really?
Yeah.
And full between each corn?
Yeah, just enough for a wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you get good return on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't have a comparison. We do pretty much
Yeah,
everything.
but I partly know from experience that's true. The kind of popcorn that we grow, the Maine heirloom popcorn, is nowhere near as big a plant. It's skinnier, whatever. And I can believe it would crowd, and it's fairly short. And I can believe I could be crowding them a lot more.
We do get more yield on the outer 2 rows than the inner 2, but you definitely get food from the inner 2.
But still, 16 inches, you said? No.
Even less, yeah.
10.
10 to 12, just enough for a wheel.
10 to 12 even. Yeah, my goodness. I'm going to mess around with that one.
How many years do you get out of the Baxters?
2.
2 years.
Rarely 3. That's actually very good for us. A lot of corns usually we don't have the very high nitrogen levels, and a lot of years. So I used to think I get a single ear per stalk was about as much I expect. This one pretty routinely gives 2. There's sometimes a problem. The second one doesn't always fill out real well or mature real well in my season, but I'll usually average 2. even though some of them have 3. I don't usually get 3 mature ones. Down here, I'm guessing you'd have a totally different story. I bet you would easily have 2 or more mature ones. Even then, again, depending on fertility level. But okay, now see if I can get this right the first time.
You know, the projector's back here. If you pointed that thing back here, you'd probably have better luck.
Like, me point it that direction?
Right there.
Yeah, because that's where the projector is.
Oh, like this. Wow.
Well, it should work.
There you go.
There you go.
Hope I didn't hit anyone with that beam. Geez, thanks for that. I can check that. That's how cool. Yeah. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, you're just bouncing it around the room otherwise.
So therefore, this is no better than here or here.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, so you know all about this computer, it's electronic stuff. I'm a whiz. Anyway, okay, this is how do you like that corn? These are a little shorter than usual. They often get taller than that, longer than that. But it's very heavy. I don't know how many robes sweet corn, and fat, thick ears. And as you can see, it's very common for these things to make twin ears. A big percentage of them will be kind of popsicle shaped, like 2 things. And some of them, you see 1 or 2 of them, they're actually making 2 things. Very heavy yielding. Those 2 ears get a lot more corn than some others.
What's that?
That's that Baxter canning corn.
That's not from mixing species.
Sorry?
It's not because it mixed with another corn?
No.
I mean, I grew some corn in my pots, and I got corn, but then the neighbor planted the next year corn, and there's different kinds that have been hybrided, and the bees go back and forth with the wind.
Wind will, in this case, yeah.
And I got disasters. I mean, I got kernels with heads with 3 corns on the whole thing, and a lot of them looked like that.
Oh, really?
And somebody told me it was because some of these new super sweet or whatever, the genetics do not mix.
I don't know how that would work, but in this case, no. I've been very careful to keep this from crossing. My field corn and popcorn are.
So if that's good, then it's good. I mean, at mine were you couldn't eat them; they were disgusting.
Yeah, especially if it's crossing with field corn.
I don't know what it was she was growing.
That's an interesting thing, by the way. Genetically, I'm not wanting to go to seed saving, but most of you probably realize if you had 2 corns, let's say field corn and sweet corn, growing close to each other this year, and you save seed from either or both of them, you would not be surprised if they crossed, right? You would expect your sweet corn is going to be kind of cobby, starchy tasting or whatever. But the thing that's strange about it, this is what you're experiencing, I believe, is this year, even if you're not saving seeds, your field corn and your sweet, and they'll say that, extension people say, if you're growing a little garden of sweet corn and you're surrounded by silage corn, your own corn isn't going to taste any good. Well, how can that happen? How can that happen in this year? So you'd expect it next year. And Rob Johnson, my friend at Johnny Selected Seeds, explained to me that corn has a double nucleus. In every kernel, there's a cytoplasmic nucleus, the one that affects the kernel, and the other one affects the germ. Well, the germ one, you're not going to feel that until next year. But the cytoplasmic one affects the kernel, the starches and all that kind of stuff. And so you're going to feel it this year. Wow. I don't know, I've asked others and they don't seem, I can't find anyone that seems to know, whether that's also the same factor in if you have hot peppers and sweet peppers near each other.
They do cross, they are very promiscuous.
Oh, sure.
I've grown sweet peppers next to habaneros and burned my mouth on the sweet peppers.
You have addition.
They really mix immediately.
Now, where I am, they rarely do.
Huh.
And maybe because of cool night temperatures, whatever. Peppers, you hear people, some tables will list peppers as being self-pollinating, not crossing. Others will say completely the other way around. And I know they can be completely promiscuous, particularly hot peppers, but sometimes peppers
well, they're self-pollinating, especially in the wind, but if there's bees around, the bees like the flowers, then they're going to... So maybe where you are, it's colder and you don't have as many bees on.
No, it's not the case. I think it has to do with the same thing with tomatoes. The shape, the morphology of the tomato blossom, and I think the peppers is the same principle, is there's certain types of tomatoes, what they call the potato leaf types, where the ovary, the female part, see they're a perfect blossom, boy and girl parts in the same blossom. Right. And so that little cone you see on a tomato blossom is the guy parts. They're keeping their sister in the closet, you know? And then bumblebees can't get at it. And so it's guaranteed that they're going to be incestuous. That's what self-pollination is. It's like basically it's incest, which in this case is desirable.
Right.
But sometimes the girl parts stick their sticky little thing out of that cone with the potato leaf types. And so a bumblebee comes along and they can't keep the sister in a room, and she's out running around with riffraff, and stuff happens, yeah.
And currant tomatoes have the same issue as well.
Now, the thing about that, however, is that doesn't manifest in this year's tomatoes. It's only if you save seeds next year. But the case with corn is you saw it right off, and you didn't even save seeds. It manifested right off. So just that little digression there. Now, okay, I'm really smart now. I know to exactly. Did it. Okay, this is field. No, this isn't field corn. This is just sweet corn that's been allowed to go by for seed. And it's easy to save your own sweet corn seed, except you've got to have coon protection, even more than for sweet corn. You can't leave it out there all that long season to ripen, cure, dry your seed, unless you keep the coons out of it. You won't get any at all.
How do you keep the coons out of yours?
In my case, I have a wire off the ground, about 10 inches off the ground on insulators on stakes with a battery charger thing on it, so they get zapped. They put their nose against it, they get 5,000 volts, and they decide they don't really like that old these corn.
And so it's, how many strands?
One. I don't know people that do two or three, but one single strand, high enough so they can't leap over it, and believe me, raccoons are not great leapers, and low enough so they can't get under it without.
So how many inches is that?
8, 10.
8, 10.
A foot would be pushing it a little bit. I would like to have it higher than that because there's a problem of gray. You have to keep mowing under it. It's not easy. You have to repeatedly keep it like a lawn, short lawn.
That really works.
It totally works. As long as I do that, keep the battery charged, keep it working, I will not lose a single ear to raccoon. As long as I'm diligent, don't wait until the corn is almost ready, and I'm going to do it one of these days, really quick. I see there, no, do it. Don't be like me. Do it at the right time.
So you don't have deer?
Pardon?
You don't have deer?
Oh yes, I have deer. Yes.
How do you keep the deer out?
Well, several ways. Partly I don't. But insofar as I succeeded, I have another wire that's about 4 feet off the ground. And it's likewise charged with electricity that's around different other gardens, other areas. And for that, the deer can jump right over it very, very easily. I mean, they can go over an 8 to 10 foot fence, so this is not going to stop them. I've sometimes seen the doe, it fawns, go right under it without even realizing they were under it. What you've got to do is you've got to train them. You take a lot of little squares, whatever, 6-inch squares of aluminum foil, and you staple it onto the tape, the electric tape, every 30 feet or so. And you smear some crappy brand peanut butter, preferably mixed with some crappy brand of jam, strawberry jam or whatever on it. And they come along and they put their tongue on it.
Oops.
And they decide they don't really like my kale or whatever anymore. This year I neglected to do that. I had very little kale in my freezer, thanks, but I got a lot left over from last year. So I know I can tell you how to do it, but don't expect me to, it's, if I did everything I know that I would be doing a lot better. Story about the door-to-door book salesman came to the farmer's house. I'll get this set of books here on farming. I don't need those. Well, I'll help you be a better farmer than you are. So, hell, I'm not farming half as well as I know how now. That's me. A lack of labor, a lack of that quote I made before from King about the crowding of gray matter. I don't have so much problem with that, but it's also being diligent as far as time goes. Someone referred to once as eyeballs per acre, paying attention and doing something at the right time. And there's an old Chinese proverb that says supposedly that the best fertilizer is the footsteps of the farmer. And I would also say the best herbicide, the best pesticide, and so on, is the best irrigation system is the footsteps of the farmer. Or as I think Woody Allen once put, he said, 80% of success in life is showing up. That's my big problem. Is I'm doing too many crops, doing too much stuff without, especially this year, without apprentices or enough hired labor to do it next year. Hopefully, going to be more on top of it. Another book out of the way. I've got 2 apprentices lined up. Next year, I won't have any other failures. But of course, none of you have that problem. So, and this is edamame soybeans, but like the corn, I let some of the plants go by. They're now dry like a dry soybean for seed.
Are they pole beans or bush beans?
The soybeans?
Edamame, yeah.
They're all bush. I don't think there's a distinction in them like there is with beans. I don't think there are pole, but there are some varieties, like a lot of the Corn Belt, Illinois varieties, that are big, rampant, sprawling, huge things, but they don't climb, in the sense that, yeah, okay. Okay, and there's a local heirloom variety of popcorn. And like he says, absolutely true, these don't get anywhere as big. I haven't tried putting that close together, but damn, I'm gonna. I put them 3 feet apart, and they have a lot more space. It's not completely wasted space, as I'll show in a few minutes. There's something else growing there. But I do grow, in this case, not edamame, but just regular soybeans. in among them. And they do quite well there, maybe partly because the corn does not give them as much competition as much. Wow, thanks for that, that's cool. Okay, now, we're moving on from the three-dimensional emphasis to simply companioning. And this is back, reiterating a little bit, but the conventional wisdom about companion planting, why it works so well, is either that things repel each other's pests, or each one provides some nutrient, something that the other one needs. In some cases, that's true. Potatoes and beans, for example, together, they say, and it's partly correct, but it's no panacea, that potatoes will help to repel the Mexican bean beetle. And the beans, in turn, will help to repel the Colorado potato bug. I've tried them that way, I did them this year. There's something to it. There's something to it. There's a difference. But I would never count on. I still had to deal with those pests, not as soon and not as badly. So most of those things are not panaceas, but they work somewhat. And also, things repel. One of the main things I think that does work is they may confuse each other, having 2 or 3 crops alternating like that. Then most of these pests, beetles and things, they used to homing in on some chemical or some light frequency, a certain shade of blue-green in your cabbage. You know, that if instead they're seeing spinach, then there's no blue there. So it throws them off, messes with their heads a lot, and that can help. Again, usually not a panacea, but it can put time a little more on your side. But here's a classic example. You will hear said that peas and carrots, it works so well because, well, the carrots are taproot. They go down deep and they bring up calcium and potassium and so on, which the peas need, and they bring it up to the surface. Hogwash. They bring up all those minerals for themselves. Now, if I eat those carrots and eat those minerals and I poop it out and that soil goes back at the same, then yes, it goes back there through me. Or if I plowed them under, didn't harvest them, just let them rot there, then that's how that potassium is. During the year that they're growing, they're not giving any potassium or anything to those peas. The peas, well, it works because peas are a legume. The bacteria on the roots, the nodules, they fix nitrogen from the air, which helps the carrots, which need nitrogen. Not, maybe to some slight extent. They may bleed some night, but they basically make that nitrogen for themselves. It will help next year's crop. We'll have that fixed nitrogen. No, what it is that I have to have enough potassium in here for those peas. Enough lime or wood ash in my case. I don't buy lime. If I put wood ash, I've got the potassium and all those minerals, magnesium and stuff, for the peas. And if there's enough there for the peas, well, they don't have to share it with the carrots, because the carrots can go and get their own, thank you. I've got to have enough nitrogen there for the carrots. They're modest needs, but what's there, they've got to have it. But if they've got it, well, they're going to share it with the peas. So if you see what I mean, it's not these things aren't so much helping each other, is they're not duking it out for the same resources. If I had rows of peas next to peas, they'd all have more nitrogen than they needed. Too much, and they'd all be fighting for the potassium. If I have the carrots close together, then the same thing. So alternating together means they simply are able to dovetail together with less competition. They're sort of convivial. They're not necessarily symbiotic. They just are content to be neighbors. Big, big difference. Yeah?
Does this row run north and south? Is that?
In this particular case, it does. This bed, I don't always have them do that, but in that garden, all the beds are, that garden, they're all north and south.
Well, would you like to take a short break now, or do you want to keep
Is this a good time to do that? Oh, you
I think
told me.
so, yeah. It's about the time we planned, so unless you want to finish up, I just want to...
It doesn't make much difference. It could be quite a ways. Well, okay, let's see. Okay. Let's try 5 or 10 minutes more.
No, that's fine. I just want to...
Because the companion thing, I think that's somewhere in there pretty soon. We're ready to move on to the permacrops.
Right.
If it doesn't happen pretty soon,
yeah, no worries. I'm
then
just
we'll do
checking
it.
on you.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, if I ever thought there was a problem filling up this time with this much material, ha-ha. There's so much to be said about all these things, and I'm avoiding all kinds of details about a lot of things, so, yeah.
Maybe you were getting to this, but what's the timing of planting for the...
Oh, in this case, the same. That works nicely. They both go pretty much as early as I can plant them, as soon as the soil's good. Thanks for that point.
And it's mostly a height issue, nothing else.
Exactly. And that's why the peas have got to be in the middle, and yeah, the carrot. And that, I used to do 3 rows of carrots, and now it's 2 rows of carrots. And just by the way, again, as far as the space thing, but I should have mentioned this when we're back on onions, is even if I'm planting onions by themselves, I put them, and I do this, I copy what I do with my grain. My grain drills, grain rows in each bed are 8 inches apart. I put my onions 8 inches apart.
How many
That's not at all too thick. They could be even thicker. That means seven rows per bed. These are 4.5 foot wide. I haven't had time to say anything about my bed. All of my land is in these intensive beds, whether it's grain or sugar beets or sunflowers or vegetables. Beds which are 6 feet apart, 6 feet wide, including the 18-inch path. So that 4.5 feet is all growing working space. I avoid stepping in it like the John Jeffens kind of thing. I don't walk in it much, and I put all the fertility there. I don't waste fertility. I don't waste water on the path. So in that space, I've got 7 rows, whereas conventional spacing would have at most 2 or 3 rows in that same space. Again, free of vroom.
And how many rows did you say?
I've got 7.
7.
7 rows, one of which is peas, and the other 3 on each side are carrots. Although, actually lately I've been putting 2 rows, so it's actually 5 rows. And the carrots get somewhat bigger because of it, because they get a little bit of, mainly from not from plant competition, but from the light. That when I do 3 rows, that inner row, I might go back to it someday. Because I do get net more carrots. I just get more smaller carrots from the inside row.
And you're digging those carrots before you get in there to harvest peas, or are you sort of working around them?
Sorry?
Are you digging those carrots before you harvest peas, or are you working around the stepping all over them?
I reach over to pick the peas.
Oh wow.
These are either snap peas or snow peas, either way. I reach over, which for me is not a problem. I'm tall enough to reach them easy. Some people wish my beds weren't quite so wide, but I find it easy. And and then I just leave them there. Either sometimes I'll leave a section to ripen some seed for next year, or sometimes I'll strip them out when they're done. In fact, I ought to do that more, because I've often done it more. As soon as these are done yielding, if I don't need it for seed, pull that all out, pull that fence, the chicken wire out, and put in a late crop of lettuce or kale or some other crop in it, so I can get a double succession crop. In Maine, we don't usually think in terms of succession crops. We're damn lucky to get 1 crop off. But certain things, this works very well, and I will get into that a little bit later. But let's keep moving here.
Marigolds seem to work for companion planting.
Oh, you're looking at that extra over. I don't know. They're supposed to go good with cucurbits for keeping away the stripers. And I'm not sure if they do at all. Okay. But I do like to companion them. That was a bad pattern. They should be much further apart. But I like growing pretty large amounts of nasturtiums for their own sake. I think of them not as a pretty crop, and not as a pest crop, as a food crop.
Absolutely, we do too.
Pickle.
Are those marigolds?
You're talking about the blossoms you're talking about?
Oh, we're talking about the marigolds in the front?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the nasturtiums.
No, nasturtiums are great.
They're there to help and repel, and I guess they do somewhat.
That folk wisdom actually is comparable.
But I thought you said that the nasturtiums, the next row over is cucumbers mixed with nasturtiums, and they're mainly there as a food crop. Pickled the green seeds. I got that from the Mule Gibbons. They're lovely. I don't pickle cucumbers much at all. I mainly pickle nasturtiums, sometimes dilly beans. They're very nice. But I really like terrasols or Jerusalem artichoke, sunchokes, what we call. They're really elegant.
Will, before you go on, spacing on the peas and spacing on the carrots, what do you?
The peas I plant 1 pound per 40 feet of row. Okay. Generally, that can vary somewhat either. No more than that. People I find usually plant peas too thin. To some extent, up to a certain point, peas do better with crowding. So I usually figure about 30, 40 feet per row. The carrots are 8 inches between the rows. I could either 2 or 3 in there.
And how much between the carrots?
Oh, I thin them to maybe 2 inches or so. Now, you can, if you want to go to an extreme, I remember our old Nichols catalog, a seed company out in Oregon, they talked about this method of kind of like a raised bed, sort of, with some boards, make a thing and fill it up with pure compost, I think they usually do it, and plant total thing, scatter all over the carrots. And obviously you have to thin them somewhat, but they didn't have any rows at all. And when it was hard, you just knock the boards down and all you have piles of carrots. You have to even dig your carrots, there they are. In other words, having a piece be almost solid carrots. That works to some extent, but I like better to have them some distance apart. Yeah. And my distance isn't, even that they're that much as 8 inches, it's only that is because of my hoe.
Because of your hoe?
Otherwise I'd put them even closer together. I could. I guess
so you try to hoe between the carrots?
I do, but early in the season.
You don't hand weed?
A little bit when I have to, when I'm naughty and don't do a good job in a row. So I do that thinning. That's the point I want to get to at the end. That's a really good one. Is I avoid any of the hoeing. I usually hoe once very early in the season when I run. If I do my job right, I won't have to do them again the rest of the year. Right. Doing my job right means I mulch them with shredded leaves. And I have a lot to say about that later. Hopefully we'll have time. I have to catch a 5:30 bus, so I want to make sure we get all this stuff in here before 5 o'clock.
Just a quick one. Any compromise you notice on the cucumber yield by interplanting with nasturtium?
I didn't see that.
Okay.
It was kind of a mess. It was kind of a tangle. I won't do it again at that spacing.
I see.
I will put them further apart and between each thing.
Okay.
But it worked fairly well. I wouldn't hesitate to try it again.
If you trellised your cucumbers, that would.
Very good point. I should have mentioned that in the beginning. We were talking about pole beans and all that stuff. If you have the labor, particularly if you're doing those oriental cucumbers, the burpless cucumbers and so forth, they really want to be. They don't yield as well lying on the ground. Those real long, spiny thing. They'll do much better that way. Yield better, be better quality. But again, you're talking about some serious investment in labor keeping this. They don't naturally, like the beans, once they get started, you don't have to do anything with it, whereas the cucumbers you have to keep. And to some extent, the trellis of tomatoes. Every once in a while, I have to, weave them in and out a little or tie them or something. But again, it can be worth it. It can be very worth it. Okay. Zach. Okay. This is one of my favorite, I'm doing this one for years. I have basically 3 rows of an umbellifera, different umbellifera, but of an umbellifera alternating with 2 rows of beets. The outer 2 rows happen to be celery, and over here celeriac. I use a lot more celeriac than I use. Actually, this row is half celery and then celeriac, because I use a lot more celeriac than I use of celery. And the middle row is also an umbellifera, but here, again, I want to have something tall down the middle. I don't have to, but I like to. And so I grow, in this case, it's coriander growing down the middle, an annual umbellifera, and the other half out of sight is dill going for seed in the middle. So that's what's replacing the celery. And then beets on either side. And again, early they were mulched with shredded leaves. So they not only have no weed problems, but they have steady moisture, they yield very heavily, and I can't imagine gardening without shredded leaves. That's a
4-foot row? With
four and a half foot wide bed. And that's when I say 4.5 feet, that's the actual growing space. That's not counting the 1.5 in between them. With grain, for example, I ignore that I plant the whole thing, so I have to think of it as a 6-foot bed. So instead of having 7 rows, I'll have 9 rows. I guess that's right, 9 or 10 rows in the bed. Because I plant the path and everything. And so basically I'm leaving that 18 inches for my big klutzy feet, not for a machine. But in between them, I only need to leave space for my hoe, or then it gets down to how much is the plant willing to be crowded. Celery and those things mostly don't want to be much more than 8 inches or a foot between them. But like I say, with carrots, you could push it even further. It gets to be a point where the plant root system is competing, or the crown is not getting enough light.
Will, did you comment on the benefits of this particular grouping of?
I can't say much about it, Peter. It works well. It works well. I don't know. A lot of these things are kind of random now. That's the point I was about to get to, is it's fun to play around with these things. Some of these are tried and true. They seem to work every year. I'm not exactly sure why. Now, your umbellifera all have, to some degree or other, a taproot, although you'd hardly notice in the celery family. But, parsnips and parsley and most of those things have a taproot. And so I would be less likely to plant those with beets, which is a taproot. So I'm planting the umbelliferas, which have not much of a taproot. They're they're going different places for different things. So keep all of those things in mind. None of these things I'm offering is some you should slavishly copy. This is the only particular command. They're all things. Some of them I'm trying new ones every year. Some of them the jury is still out. This is one I've been doing for a long time. It seems to work. Not even sure why. I don't particularly care why, but it works very well. So I'll do it again and again. Okay, there's not much to say about this. It's bush green beans, string beans, alternating with rutabagas. Actually, it's not even a row of green beans down the middle and a row of rutabagas on either side. And now in this case, the rutabagas went in later than the green beans. Turnips could go in early in the spring, but rutabagas, I don't plant them before the middle of June. I'll plant them as late as the 4th of July, even later, have them do just fine. So I put the green beans in, and it's like a couple weeks later when the rutabagas go in. And the green beans will be out long before the rutabagas. I'll either leave them there, or usually I'll yank them out when they're gone by, and partly to avoid getting downy mildew. And if this time, I'll put in another crop there, like some late lettuce or something.
Is that a single row of green beans?
A single row, yeah. They sprawl a lot. Yeah, that's kind of a problem. I could do 2 rows. I could do 3, but it's pushing it. They crowd a lot, and I want to mix it up as much as I can. I'm wacko into diversity, and even diversity of diversity. Within the beds, I want as many things as I can put there. Okay, here's one of my favorites. Leeks, this is fairly early in the season, leeks and kale. Leeks go in quite early, and then the kale I put in quite a lot later, and I'll show you how I managed to choke up on the time there a little bit to get even more. But they work very well together. Okay, that's the same thing again. I think that's okay. Here is. I remember that year I tried. That worked pretty well. On the other part, I had either carrots over here, and it was a miscellaneous thing. I had over endive and escarole on the outside, and then 2 rows of leeks, not garlic, and then in the middle there was peas. This is late in the season. These peas have been the fence has been taken out, and I stuck in some late. I think that's Jersey Wakefield early cabbage. It's not Brussels sprouts, I don't think. It's some brassica, some cabbage family thing that went in late, and as I recall, did pretty well, even though it was very late going in.
Did that replace something you had there?
The peas. The peas came out, yeah. And again, as soon as the peas were done, most of their yield, I didn't wait to get every single one, and I didn't wait to get dry seed from them. I had that going also. If I really wanted to make, use that space, then I said, cut my losses and run. These are field peas. I don't know why I've got this in at this point. I'm not sure. I grow a lot of field peas, and I grow them much like peas. Okay, here's, you're seeing a row of two rows. This was a bed, and there was the little lettuce transplants. That was peas on a trellis. Yeah. And there was, I think it's Jersey Wakefield cabbage on the outside. And there were scallions between those two. They've come out and been used, probably in the freezer. Jersey Wakefield's got a couple more rows, weeks heading up. But the peas came out early, and I got them replaced with some late, I think, romaine lettuce or something. I put it there. In the background, you're seeing an interesting combination. You're seeing the stuff that looks grassy stuff is actually nutsedge or chufa, also known as garden almond. And growing that the last year. I grew it many years ago and wasn't too impressed by it. Didn't get a good yield. Since then, I've grown it much better care and getting. I'll show you. And in that crop in between that, I'm alternating it with chickpeas. That's what I've been experimenting with.
The dark or the lighter variety?
No,
I mean the variety, the chickpeas themselves. Variety. I just started growing the darker ones, the black ones they grow.
Like from Petco?
Yeah.
That Kabuli, black Kabuli? Yeah. I've had pretty good luck with those.
I just grew them this year.
Well, just a little digression onto that. There are 2 types of chickpeas, just there are 2 types of fava beans. Right. The Kabuli types of chickpeas are the large, all those cream-colored, big, roundish ones you get in the health food store, those are the Kabuli type. Generally, they don't do that well for me, although that black Kabuli does fairly well. Kabul, of course, is the capital of Afghanistan, and that's this whole type, this whole race are named after it. But there's another type, which originated from India, the Desi types. And that's what this is, and I'll show you a picture of them. They're smaller, more angular. They usually are typically brick red, although they go to black and purple, and got some that are green, gold, amber colored. They're very colorful. And for me, they do a whole lot better, much more reliable. My favorite variety, which this would be, is a Mexican variety called Brown Sonora. That's one of the Desi type, Indian types. A lot of in East Africa, Kenya, and Malawi, they grow a lot of those varieties. They're used much more.
Is that your shredded leaf mulch?
Pardon?
Your shredded leaf mulch, is that what we see?
That's what you're seeing there, yeah. You should be seeing it everywhere. If there's any places you see that you don't see it, it's because I was a bad boy or for some reason, not caught up on it yet. But and by the way, I will digress enough to say that the shredded leaves they're not only serving a great purpose this year as a mulch, but they're a considerable contribution toward the fertility for next year. Depending what the crop following it is, I might not have to add anything else. Just and I don't have to rototill them in. They're broken down a lot by the end of the season. I can usually just push the wheel, the cultivator through, and they'll break in. And by next spring, you'd never know they were there. But there'll be a very significant amount of fertility there. In many cases, enough for the next. Depending what if it's a heavy feeding crop, I'll add more yet. But I love it when my mulch is also my. Okay, this is Savoy type cabbage, and it's alternated, companioned with sugar beets. It's an Austrian heirloom variety of sugar beet that I grew up. And also was in it scallions, which I guess have been taken out by this point. And also, I'm not going to say much about it yet, but in among it there was also, you can barely see it here and there, some white Dutch clover. Which so that's another crop, a food crop, and I'll say more about that. Pardon?
What's the green at the upper right?
Upper right. Does that look like chard to you?
Sugar beet.
It isn't. That's sugar beets. This variety of sugar beets has 2 colors. It's an interesting. It's an heirloom, land race, And the ones that look red like beets,
Yeah,
and those, they're the
that's
same variety, but they're different types.
Uh-huh.
It's a mixed variety. That's the way it came to me. It's the way it's supposed to be.